Horror never really dies. It mutates, it reboots, it resurrects itself from the grave. Sometimes better, sometimes worse. For every franchise that becomes immortal, there are five others that burn bright and then vanish forever. Some horror series last decades. They survive trends, they survive bad sequels, and they survive reboots, while others can barely make it past their third installment. This Friday, the latest installment of the Scream franchise hits theaters, and whether it flies high or crashes and burns, one question will always remain. Why do some horror franchises go on forever, while others collapse under their own weight? Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about it. Ladies and gentlemen, it's showtime.
Core question.
If you look at horror history, there's a clear pattern. Some franchises become generational, others peak early and disintegrate quickly. Take Halloween, for example. Launching in 1978, it's still relevant and it still reinvents itself every so often. Or Friday the 13th, which survived a whole bunch of bad sequels and bad reboots, but 12 films in, and it's reached this iconic status. Then compare it to franchises that start off strong and then lose steam very, very quickly. And why? Why does this happen? It isn't luck. It comes down to 5 key factors: iconography, narrative elasticity, creative reinvention, cultural timing, and studio restraint, or lack thereof. But we're gonna get into each one by one, so grab your popcorn and let's get into it.
Iconography, power of the mask.
Franchises that last tend to create something that's instantly recognizable, like Pinhead's pins. A Nightmare on Elm Street didn't succeed just because it's scary. They gave the audience a villain with personality, a visual identity, which would be the red sweater and the hat and the burned face, and a myth. Everyone wanted to know where Freddy came from. Meanwhile, franchises without a central icon, they struggle to maintain cohesion. Look at the early success of Paranormal Activity. The first film was revolutionary, the second one built mythology. But over time, without a central face, the audience tends to lose interest. And I know what you're gonna say. Katie was one of the big bads in that franchise, but she wasn't the main villain. And even though there is a Toby that we hear about throughout the films, tell me what he looks like. Iconography builds brand loyalty. Brand loyalty sustains sequels. If you can put a villain on a poster that people instantly recognize, you have a potential franchise.
Narrative elasticity. Bend, but don't break storylines.
Some horror concepts are expandable, others are traps. The original Saw, for example, was brilliant because it brought up more of a moral game, twisted traps, a lot of philosophy, and that concept allows for time travel, timeline manipulation, flashbacks, apprentices, and you can always continue to expand the storyline. But elasticity does have its limits, and Saw broke one of the other factors later on in this list. But compare that to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The original film, which is one of my personal favorites, was raw and grimy. It was lightning in a bottle. But its premise, which is just random rural violence, you can't really expand on that. And that means every sequel has to fall into a certain formula. Because if you attempt to stretch away from that, you end up changing the premise of the film and it is no longer following the original concept. Successful franchises are able to create a sandbox big enough for them to continue to expand ideas without falling into repetition quite so early.
Reinvention versus repetition.
Horror evolves with culture. The reason Scream worked so well in 1996 is because it dissected horror tropes. It was a very self-aware movie for the time. And every time it returned, it comments on the era in which they're in. And that's key. Look at the Conjuring universe. Instead of telling the same story repeatedly, it expanded sideways with spin-offs, different tones, different subgenres, but all within the same controlled mythology. Now let's contrast that with franchises that lean way too hard into their formula. There's a fine line between building a formula and then getting trapped within it. Repetition feels safe. Studios know that it works. Audiences are familiar with it. But horror is the one genre where predictability kills suspense. Let's talk about one of the clearest examples of when a formula traps a franchise and the franchise dies because of it. In 2004, the original Saw was revolutionary. It changed the landscape of horror up until this day. It was contained, it was psychological, it was twisted, the violence was shocking, but the hook was the morality of it all. Then something happened. Every year, like clockwork, they released a new sequel. The structure became clear. You knew exactly what you were going to see when you walked into that film. Cold open trap, philosophical monologue, intercut to police procedures, and then a third act twist revealing a secret apprentice. By the time the later entries came about, everybody kind of knew exactly what you were going to get. And when you can outline a film before it's even released, then obviously the fear of it all disappears. And it just becomes, can we guess the ending? When audiences can predict every beat, scare, chase, kill, repeat, tension completely evaporates. Reinvention doesn't mean abandoning your identity. It means evolving within it.
Cultural timing.
Horror is reactive. It mirrors anxiety. The slasher boom of the 80s reflected suburban paranoia and moral panic. Post 9/11 horror leaned more into brutality. Franchises that survived understood this and moved within it. When they failed to adapt and to come into the times that they're currently operating in, everything they do feels dated. Everything feels like an annoying trope that we've seen 1,000 times. A horror franchise isn't just competing with other horror films and other films in general. It's competing with the mood of the society in which it's being born into. And that mood often changes quickly.
Knowing when to stop.
Holy shit. This is probably the most important one. Studios often make the mistake of looking at short-term profits over long-term sustainability. The more sequels you push out, the faster you erode the trust of your audience. Look how many horror franchises go dormant and then come back and everyone flocks to theaters to go and see them. And that is one of the key factors that the Saw franchise broke. They simply kept putting out sequels and checking boxes and not taking enough time to really craft a good enough story that would keep people interested once the shock and awe of the tortures wore off. Oversaturation, it completely kills the mystique. The distance between longevity and burnout is pacing.
Case study, Scream 7.
Now we return to Friday's release of Scream 7. This franchise has survived nearly 3 decades. And why? Well, strong iconography with Ghostface, built-in commentary on horror culture, a very flexible whodunit structure, willingness to shift generational focus. But here's going to be the real test for this film coming up. Can it keep evolving without becoming predictable? The whodunit format can be its strength and its weakness, because audiences now expect subversion. They expect escalation. If the franchise continues to adapt to modern horror, it will completely survive. But if it begins to rely too much on nostalgia, then I'm afraid it's going to join the others in the didn't know when to stop graveyard. Horror franchises don't survive because they're scary. They survive because they adapt, because they understand fear isn't static. It shifts, it evolves, it reflects us. Some killers become legends while others fall into obscurity and into whatever algorithm the streaming platform they're on. So when you walk into theaters to go see Scream 7, ask yourself, is this franchise still evolving? Or is this just trying to survive? Because in horror, survival isn't about how loud you scream. It's about how well you adapt to circumstances in front of you. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for joining me on this trip. What did you think of the video? Subscribe, let me know at the bottom, and I will see you in the next video for Scream 7. Peace.